Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The streets of Chicago were still shrouded in morning mist. The sun, timid, struggled to pierce the gray veil of the sky. In Central Park, the benches were still damp with dew, and the air smelled of the familiar mixture of fallen leaves and hot asphalt. 72-year-old Harold Johnson walked slowly along the cobblestone path. His oak cane struck the ground with each step, producing a steady rhythm that seemed to match his thoughts. His wrinkled face bore the marks of life, but also those of war. The scars of his military past were not visible, but his upright and dignified bearing betrayed a discipline etched deep within him. A former Vietnam soldier, Harold had faced death, survived ambushes, and learned to remain calm in the chaos. As he walked, he thought back to his youth, the dense jungles, the crushing heat, the shouts of his comrades, and the lingering smell of smoke and gunpowder. Each memory was an invisible scar, but he had learned, fear could be mastered, violence controlled. But that morning, the calm was about to be shattered. Behind a tree, a young man with a nervous and arrogant air, Derek Harris, watched Harold with a cruel smile. Derek was known in the neighborhood for harassing passers-by, looking for easy targets, and proving his superiority through brute force. He saw Harold as a frail old man, perfect prey. Without warning, Derek emerged from the shadows. A sharp, violent blow struck Harold in the face. The old man staggered, a mixture of surprise and pain, but his gaze remained fixed, impassive. Behind this apparent calm, a storm was brewing. Harold felt his war memories resurface, his survival instinct awaken. He knew that every second counted. Derek sneered, certain his intimidation tactics had worked. "Old man, you're finished," he snapped. But Harold, despite his age, showed neither fear nor weakness. His eyes shone with a brilliance no youth could rival. Behind him, the park seemed to hold its breath. The birds fell silent. Even the wind grew still, as if preparing for the moment to come. This moment, ordinary for the neighborhood, was about to become a turning point. Harold Johnson was not just an old man, he was a decorated veteran, a survivor of countless battles, and he was about to prove that courage and dignity have no age or limit. Derek Harris stepped back slightly, surprised by Harold's unexpected resistance. He expected the old man to collapse, begging, but Harold remained upright, holding his cane as an extension of his arm, his eyes fixed on the young aggressor with a calm but formidable intensity. "What are you doing?" stammered Derek, confused and nervous. His voice trembled slightly, something his arrogance refused to admit. Harold took a deep breath, feeling his heart pound but his mind perfectly clear. Every memory of his years in Vietnam flooded back, the ambushes, the surprise attacks, the comrades who had fallen beside him. He remembered the lessons the war had taught him, to remain in control, to analyze every move, and to strike only when the moment was perfect. Before Derek could attack again, Harold stepped aside and, with surprising speed, shoved Derek's arm, causing him to lose his balance and fall heavily to the ground. The impact echoed through the park. Derek, stunned, didn't immediately understand what had just happened. Passers-by began to stop. Some took out their phones, others approached, curious to see this old man stand up to a visibly violent young man. The air was thick with tension, every breath seemed amplified. Harold spoke in a low but firm voice. "You don't know what you're doing. You're hitting an old man, but you don't know who you're attacking." Derek, blushing with anger and humiliation, tried to get up and sneer. "Old man, you don't have the strength anymore, I'm going to crush you," he yelled, clenching his fists. But Harold, ever calm, placed his hand on the cane and, with a precise movement, swiveled it to block Derek's arm. The young man staggered, unable to maintain his aggressive stance. Harold's experience and military discipline were evident, every movement was calculated, every gesture precise. Passers-by murmured amongst themselves, impressed by the old man's composure and calm. Some began filming. Derek, for the first time in a long time, felt fear creeping into his body. What he thought was just an old man was in fact a hardened veteran, a man who had survived the horrors of Vietnam and who would never be intimidated. Harold, still standing straight, his eyes fixed on Derek, concluded. If you want to learn respect, start with me. At that moment, the young man understood that he had unleashed something he could never control. The shock had barely begun, but the lesson would be etched in his memory forever. Derek Harris slowly rose to his feet, his face red with anger and shame. His arrogance had shaken. He still couldn't understand how an old man seemed to be in control of the situation with such ease. Harold Johnson, meanwhile, calmly caught his breath. Every movement was measured, every gesture precise. He knew that fear could be a more powerful weapon than violence. As Derek prepared to strike again, Harold made a simple gesture. He pulled his military ID card from his inside pocket, revealing his medals. The Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and his military dog tag glittered in the morning light. Passers-by froze. Murmurs began. Is he a veteran? Derek stepped back in disbelief. His cruel smile vanished. He had struck an old man, thinking he was intimidating a mere citizen, but now he found himself facing a Vietnam War survivor, a man decorated for his bravery. Harold spoke in a firm, icy but calm voice. You hit innocent people to feel powerful. You think it makes you strong, but you know nothing of courage, nothing of real fighting. Derek clenched his fists, but a hesitation began to creep in. The passers-by continued filming. Every move, every word Harold spoke was being watched. For the first time, Derek felt the weight of his actions, not only on himself, but on the image he projected to the world. Harold took a step towards him, his imposing figure despite his age, and continued. In the jungle, I saw my comrades fall around me. I faced fear, pain, death. And you, what are you trying to prove to yourself by hitting an old man? The silence in the park was heavy, almost suffocating. Derek looked around and realized that everyone saw him for what he was, a violent and arrogant young man, publicly humiliated. Fear had now replaced anger. Harold raised his hand, not to strike, but to block Derek if necessary. You still have a chance to leave here and never attack someone weaker again. Otherwise, you'll learn a lesson you'll never forget. For the first time, Derek felt the true weight of respect. It wasn't an empty threat. It was the presence of a man who had survived horror, who knew what it meant to fight for his life and for honor. The young man stepped back, hesitant, unable to speak. Harold, still calm, slowly turned on his heel, as if the fight was over, but leaving behind a clear message: gratuitous violence always has a price. Passers-by applauded timidly, some angry with Derek, others impressed by Harold's courage and dignity. This moment would remain etched in their memories. An elderly black man, a Vietnam veteran, had just demonstrated that courage is not measured by age, but by self-control and respect. Derek Harris stepped back, breathless, his fists still clenched, but his arrogance had vanished. The entire park seemed to hold its breath. Passers-by formed a circle, some holding their phones to film, others simply shocked by what they were seeing. Harold Johnson, for his part, remained calm, but every movement of his body showed that he was ready to react if necessary. His gaze never left Derek. He knew that this young man did not yet understand the magnitude of his actions. Do you think hitting others makes you strong? Harold asked, his voice low but penetrating. Do you think you can dominate through fear? Derek attempted one last impulsive move, a quick blow toward Harold, but the old man, with astonishing precision, blocked him with his cane and knocked him to the ground once more. The impact echoed through the park. The young man got to his feet, panting and humiliated. His clothes were crumpled, his hands scraped. Fear and shame now replaced the anger that had once consumed him. Harold took a step towards him, imposing by his mere presence. Look around you. All these people saw you for what you are. Not a tough guy, not a winner, just a violent kid who hits the weak. The murmurs turned into indignant whispers. Passers-by began to approach, some shouting warnings at Derek. What he had thought was a simple game of dominance was now becoming a public moment of humiliation. Harold showed his military dog tag and decorations again. You just attacked a Vietnam veteran. A man who survived the war, the ambushes, the daily fighting. And you hit an old man to prove what to yourself? Derek collapsed to his knees, unable to meet Harold's gaze. The heavy silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the murmurs of the crowd. The lesson was clear: gratuitous violence always has a price, and the arrogance of reckless youth never withstands dignity and experience. At that precise moment, 2 police officers arrived, alerted by witnesses. Derek, sweating and covered in dirt, tried to lie, but the passers-by and the cell phone videos betrayed him. Harold, unperturbed, simply observed. Justice would now take its course, but the message had already been delivered. Harold slowly turned on his heel, resuming his walk towards the library. Each step was measured, each movement imbued with calm and dignity. Derek, on the other hand, remained on his knees, confronted by his actions and the shame he could never erase. That day, the park was never the same again. The inhabitants had witnessed a simple but powerful truth: courage and dignity never disappear with age, and those who choose violence must always pay the price for their arrogance. Derek Harris sat on the ground, his hands still trembling, unable to stand. Shame weighed on him more heavily than any slap or blow he had ever received. Passers-by stared at him, some with contempt, others with a mixture of relief and admiration for Harold. The police officers approached and began asking questions. Derek tried to downplay the incident, but the crowd and the videos on their phones confirmed every gesture, every word, every act of aggression. He was trapped by his own pride. Harold Johnson, for his part, continued on his way to the library. His wrinkled face still bore the gravity of a man who had survived the horrors of Vietnam, but a slight smile betrayed his satisfaction. He knew that justice had just been served, not only by the law, but by the lesson he had just taught Derek and all those who had been watching. On the way, Harold thought back to his fallen comrades, to the fear that had once haunted him in the jungles, and to the quiet strength he had cultivated throughout his life. He realized that today, he had not only defended his honor, but had also passed on a lesson of courage, dignity, and respect to a new generation. Meanwhile, Derek was taken away by the police. Public humiliation followed him like a shadow. He knew his actions would have consequences: a citation for assault, damning testimony, and a reputation shattered forever. But beyond the legal punishment, he had learned a lesson no one could take away from him: hitting someone weaker, or underestimating a veteran, leads only to shame and regret. In the park, passers-by murmured amongst themselves, some congratulating Harold, others impressed by the life lesson. Local newspapers and videos on social media would soon transform this encounter into an example for the entire city. Harold entered the library, his quiet footsteps echoing in the hall. He didn't need a noisy victory. His dignity, his experience, and his courage had spoken for him. Behind him, the park was silent, but the echoes of his lesson would linger in people's memories for a long time. And so, what had begun as a violent and unjust attack ended in a silent but resounding triumph of justice, respect, and courage. Harold Johnson, a Vietnam veteran, had shown that age and wisdom are worth more than brute force, and that those who underestimate others always end up learning their lesson.